Ask Reddit. What's the craziest reason you had to fire someone? I was a bar manager. This guy came in one night and said he was an aspiring DJ and asked if we would consider hiring him to come in on just Sunday nights to DJ for us. He said we wouldn't have to pay him at first, he would just take tips and we could renegotiate after he helped to build up our Sunday night crowd. He lasted less than 3 months. He drove away so much business and I got so many complaints. He played the same songs every week, and when people made requests for commonly known songs, he had no idea who they, the musicians, were. I had to fire someone who was working for free. He was a nice guy, which is the only reason he lasted as long as he did. Not my personal experience, but one fellow contractor had a safety guy for 6 months. One weekend he took a trip out of town for non-work related reasons, but used the company truck and charged it all on the company credit card. On his way up there, he ran a random person off the road who just so happened to be one of the owners of another contractor who works closely with the one who employed this guy. Shortly after he was fired, and I'm sure criminal charges were being brought against him. A couple of weeks later, his wife calls his former employer, saying he had called her randomly and killed himself in his truck on the side of the highway. I and another colleague went searching for records of this guy, couldn't find anything, no claims of suicide in the local paper where he supposedly killed himself at. Thought it was weird, but whatever. It turns out this guy falsified all his qualifications and job experience. Fast forward a month later, and I heard through the grapevine that the original contractor who had employed this guy received a call from some contractor across the country because he applied for work there and put them down as his previous employer. He faked his own death to get out of trouble with the company, then proceeded to put them down on his resume, not expecting anyone to check his references. Lol. I work for a hotel. I had to fire 2 separate employees on 2 different occasions for letting people in vacant rooms to smoke crack and steal from the rooms. It reminds me of my brother's hotel where they hired a welfare recipient to work in housekeeping and help with maintenance. The first thing he asked was where the safe was. My brother caught him trying to break into the safe 3 hours later and fired him on the spot, of course. I had an employee that was going to get fired for simply showing up late constantly with no legit reason. During the term meeting, she tells me another employee cut the brake lines in her car. It's obvious this was to save her from being fired. She didn't realize that something like that gets cops involved. She was termed, and then detectives showed up to her house to get statements. Of course, no evidence of lines being cut, and now she's dealing with police for making false statements. Fired a high schooler because his girlfriend kept showing up and they would disappear behind the racks. I told him his girlfriend was banned, trying not to fire him, and she kept sneaking back. I worked in an office, and they hired a girl from a temp agency to help me. She wouldn't do anything unless I walked her through each step after telling her she had to do it. Hey, an estimate just arrived on the fax right next to you. Complete the quote and send it back. Come to find out she was playing Spider and Solitaire on her computer. She was also sneaking out back, and the warehouse guys thought she was doing drugs. I told my boss, get rid of her. I would rather work alone than babysit her, so he called the temp agency and told them to stop sending her. She showed up the next day, so the boss sent her home and called the agency saying, hey, she's useless, stop sending her. She showed up again the next day. This went on for over a week. The people at the temp agency said they told her to stop showing, but she kept coming in every morning. Mind you, usually 10 to 20 minutes late. My boss wouldn't say anything to her face, so finally, I said, hey, we can't afford to pay you, so we have to let you go through the temp agency. They should have told you. She was all, oh, I thought they were joking. I was so glad she was gone. Years ago at a lumber company, I had a guy, less than 2 hours after he started on his first day, pick up his car with a forklift and stand underneath it to see what was rattling when he drove. Turned out it was his brain. His head wasn't screwed on tight. I worked retail, and we had an employee that would hide and take naps inside racks of clothes. Somehow that wasn't the reason we fired her. We fired her for stealing clothes and then wearing them to work. Like, you can somewhat understand having a nap, and maybe she thought hide in plain sight with the clothes. During my summer job when I was in college, I had a shift with this guy who didn't show up. I didn't have his number, so I asked my boss to look into it. He gets back to me a little later and says the guy is on his way. I should be there in about 5 to 10 minutes. 45 minutes later, the guy still hasn't shown up. So I text my boss again, and he gets back to me a little later and says he's certain the guy should be there any minute. But he still doesn't show up. This continues until the end of the shift, and the guy still isn't here. The closing took a little longer than normal because I was on my own. So I was still working half an hour after my shift was supposed to be over, when this guy strolls in with his girlfriend. He half-heartedly helps for a little while in between chatting with his girlfriend, before saying he's got some important family dinner and he has to leave. Apparently, this wasn't even the first time this had happened, but amazingly, this wasn't what got him fired. What finally did it was a couple of weeks later when we had a staff meeting. My boss had an open shift that he needed someone to fill, and this guy volunteers. So my boss, in front of all the staff, has the following conversation. You want to work this shift? Yes. Are you sure you're available to work this shift? Yes. So that means you'll be at the location at such a time on such a day. Yes. Then he still didn't show up. Some people, man. My co-worker at a coffee shop. I told the customer she didn't feel like making X drink and she should go elsewhere. I wore Cookie Monster PJ pants while we had a very strict black or khaki pants, no jeans, no leggings policy at the time. Couldn't figure out the concept of milk. This still baffles me to this day. Like I was trying to show her how to steam milk properly. She was off in La La Land, and when she snapped back into the conversation asking, "What are we doing again?" Followed by me reminding her, and she quite literally asked what was in the gallon jug that I poured into the metal pitcher. I told her it was milk, and she just looked at me, her eyes saying, "Huh?" She was there for 2 days. Dumbass stole a $100 bill out the register at the end of his first shift alone on register. Firing's done because people do not realize that the cash gets counted. They activated a gift card for $100 and keyed in $100 as if someone had paid $100 for the gift card. Of course, that night the draw was $100 short, and activation was on the receipt. She was already on the radar under suspicion of taking a 20 from the draw. Then $20 disappeared from another draw, but not one she had been using. Her cashier number was not on the record. Except for the security, footage did show something at the register. It turns out she memorized another employee's cashier number. Sneaky, but not sneaky enough. A firing done for other reasons. One employee was fired for pretending to ring up his friend. He could have gotten away with it. He scanned everything on price check mode, pretended to swipe his buddy's credit card, and fed a length of blank register tape out as if a receipt were printed out. No one noticed anything off. Except his buddy never asked him to do it. The cashier took it upon himself to hook him up, and in the end, the friend was left thinking, what the hell just happened? He felt so guilty the next day he brought the items back and told the manager what had happened. Not too crazy, more stupid than crazy. One of the programmers on my team was sitting at his desk looking at porn. And this is cubicle land, no offices. My director walked into the area to talk to me and saw it. Then it was the first thing he told me about, so I got up and walked over for a look myself, and there it was. I and the director looked at each other, and I said, I gotta take care of this. So we walked back to HR. I told them what was going on and what we saw, and they told me to fire him. So I did. He lost a $110,000 job for looking at porn on his computer at work. When I worked in hotels, I was promoted to front desk manager. My first task was to hire someone. I ended up getting this very charismatic guy that was a little over the top, but overall seemed like a solid employee. After I ended up hiring him, and on his first day, he asked me if it's okay if he carries his gun on him. And I think that's strange, but it is his right, and the owners honestly didn't care so long as he had his license. He was never able to produce a license, so he was never able to bring his handgun on the property. About a week into his employment, we find out that he's been calling guests, specifically the really attractive females, and asking them if they need any overnight service. We were very understaffed, and my boss decided that instead of firing him, we were going to take him off the desk and put him on basic groundsman duties. Part of these duties included driving the shuttle to the airport and back, and also filling up the shuttle when it got low on fuel, which means that he had access to the gas card. Our accountant confronts me one day about some very strange charges to the gas card. Apparently, we had been filling up the shuttle near daily at anywhere between $20 to $45. We looked into it and got the surveillance footage from the gas station, and it turns out this kid was filling up his friends' cars and even his own car. When confronted, he tells my boss that I said it was okay. Obviously, that wasn't true, and they didn't believe him. He ended up also being my first termination. One of the other employees Googled his name and found out he was a child predator. He was in a sexual relationship with a 12-year-old girl when he was 26. I also found out that day that we didn't actually do background checks. We just said we did and assumed anyone with a history wouldn't bother applying. We had someone fall asleep at his desk with a lit cigarette in his hand. In an office full of cubicles like maybe 6-7 years ago, smoking wasn't legal anywhere indoors, let alone in an office building, LMAO. And the first time he wasn't even fired. He was fired when it happened again. Had a guy in my team start smoking a cigarette at his desk. He was diabetic, and when confronted it was clear he was low on blood sugar. A soda later, and he was quickly himself. CEO ordered me to fire one of my interns because he was trying to hit on one of the other interns the CEO had the hots for. I'm curious how you were told to fire him. Was it just, hey, fire that guy? Or did he actually say, I've got the hots for that intern he's hitting on, and I won't stand for it? He said to get rid of that guy after that guy asked her to do something after work. Everyone knew that a particular intern was off limits.